Radio Cosmik, Radio Cosmik, Radio Cosmik.
The diesel train was making steady progress through the countryside, gradually drawing the urban density of life closer through the passive parallax view of the window seat that Emily had chosen to sit in for the long journey. She was listening to an endless stream of shuffled songs and ambient sounds on her phone while looking at the handwritten letter that had arrived unexpectedly at the family homestead as the winter began. She repeated the words silently in her mind. It would be good if you could help. And she wondered how she could help anyone. Did they not think to ask if she needed help? But somehow it was easier to give into the movement, that sitting still while her body was moved by the machine taking her through a white landscape of snow-covered fields gave her a feeling of motion in her mind. It was the feeling something was happening in her life when things had been looping for so long. It had been a shock to everyone to be told that the inheritance of the family farm would have to be worked out, and she had struggled to speak to those who gave sad smiles through a glitching digital screen bringing disembodied images and voices from Australia and Canada. But what nobody had really explained was the necessity to go to the big smoke and see their grandfather, the longest lived of all the clan. How old was he now? She wasn't sure. Apparently he was on his own now, and there was some vague worry about his eccentric ways. Maybe it was worry for its own sake. Emily didn't feel worried about anything. The naturally pristine white landscape was like an image from a dream, one that made her feel her consciousness was flickering between waking and sleeping, as though the blanket of snow was pouring whiteness into her, like it was triggering a trance state. She closed her eyes as she felt the sensations of her body slip away. Red, blue, green, yellow and purple bubbles floated up inside a long geometric black box. As they floated, they gently touched one another and flashed alternating colours before flashing black and white, and drifted past one another again. A transparent hand floated in front of eyes that couldn't be felt or closed. She concentrated for a moment on closing her eyes, but nothing changed in the sliding box of bubbles. The hand kept moving towards her until it seemed to pass through her own invisible head. But now everything glowed with the luminescent white light, and lines began sketching out the details of the place. The train carriage and seats and windows all now glowing black and white line drawings, but she could perceive no other passengers. A woman appeared in the opposite seat, seeming to emerge out of the light. She had a calm smile and looked at Emily as if she knew her. She glowed with the same energy as everything that was invisible, appearing to phase in and out of reality with the movement of something external like a train or the air being breathed in and out of somebody's lungs in some other place. Emily turned to look out the window but could perceive nothing but this warm, peaceful glow. She touched what she imagined was the pane of glass, and a gigantic blue eye appeared. Emily hesitated to touch it again, thinking she could injure this apparition in some way. But still she wondered what this image was, and then it blinked and dissolved into many eyes. Too many to count. Millions appearing and disappearing as they blinked, and as they did so, a double eye appeared to take flight like butterflies. Emily instinctively tried to close her own eyes to the imagery that felt like it was going to consume her sensations in this world. "You are an angel of light," the transparent woman was whispering through still and silent lips. "You can feel it all. You can choose what to tune into, but you must remember who you are, or you will be nothing but food, and that is not why you came." Emily opened her eyes to see a young mother sitting opposite her who was breastfeeding her baby. A flowing strand of rainbow light was winding around the two bodies and rising above them in a shape that suddenly looked like a cobra's head, with its mouth opening to reveal a shimmering rainbow tongue instead of fangs. The flickering tongue held blinking blue eyes at its curled tips. They stared into her. Emily closed her eyes and felt an easy, calm warmth flood into the black space of her mind. She stayed in that space for what seemed an unimaginable amount of time, feeling the space rushing like a waterfall through her until she was dissolved and was inseparable from the sensation. Somehow she dared to open her eyes again and saw the train carriage reappear. The ordinary functional mechanical sight of the grubby utilitarian vehicle carrying all the people to the city was strange in its extreme detail. In fact, there was so much detail she started to imagine that when she concentrated on the rivet in a metal panel, she could perceive the rivet being struck inside a German factory and the panel being flattened in a vast complex in China. The world was ordinary again, but all origins were flowing directly into the presence of her attention. She looked at the other passengers, the suited office workers vibrating grey squiggles to one another that collided together to make clouds of grey squiggles that began to transparently rain down. Noisy children blurted out vibrant red and blue shapes. The young mother and baby continued pulsing rivers of rainbows that began turning into a trickling stream that ran into Emily's heart. She looked down to see her body pulse the green turning geometric pattern 6 foot out into the carriage. She watched one of the green pulses travel out and intersect with the grey random squiggle shape of an office worker. As they met, he looked up and found Emily's eyes. She instantly averted her gaze as all she felt was a deathly black void that threatened to suck her in. She closed her eyes and listened to the rolling hum of the train as it steadily drew her through the black landscape of her mind. And as she fell into a heavy dream, she could see a tabby cat sitting on a mossy stone wall, twisting its tail as a wrinkled hand gently tugged it and let go. The capital city was bustling with the myriad faces of strangers swarming anonymously through the cold morning streets. Every face was completely unique to its owner, its expressions alive in the moment of animation. Emily felt there was so much detail to take in. It was confusing to see all these people she had no relationship with or knowledge of passing by, never to be seen again. So many of them looked grey and ashen, as though their life force was ebbing out into the dull clouds above the city. Some were stumbling and limping along as though returning from the Eastern Front. There were children being pushed in wheelchairs, others had amputated arms, while some young men had amputated legs replaced with the metal substitutes that they hobbled over the cobblestones with, while others were bright and gleeful as they laughed in the energy of their desire for entertainment. Emily felt as though she was walking through a Hieronymus Bosch painting, but had yet to find the real garden of earthly delights. Around the corner from the designer shops and refurbished national museums were piles of sleeping bags that looked like stacks of corpses or dummies. She didn't know which, but found her eyes drawn away to look instead at the eyes of strangers walking past. She wanted to know who would look and acknowledge them, and who would look away, and what was the cruelty done to the children held by the hand for a day in the big smoke as they looked at the silent ground. Here were all those iconic and historic places she now had the opportunity to visit, after a lifetime spent in the same rural homestead. All those expensive shops to peruse and discover the multiplicity of consumerism that had been out of reach. But she felt it was too much for this cold moment, and instead of lingering on her first day in the city, she decided to go to the other train station that would deliver her to the small town in suburbia where she imagined she was needed. The electric green train glided along the coast with a steady speed that never accelerated to excitement, as it stopped every few minutes for the suburban stations that dotted the coast like outposts. The view of civilization on one side consisted of sloping green banks that ran up to the echoes of past glories, with old Georgian townhouses that looked out on mostly the same view as their original owners, and on the other side of the view was the sweeping curve of Dublin Bay that ran like a giant letter C running north to south. The tide was out, revealing a soft expanse of sand and marsh that was being enjoyed by scores of feeding birds wading in the low water. beside a few solitary figures allowing their domesticated dogs to run free into the temporary wild expanse. The thin line of buildings on the sea edge with their sea view still seemed like a temporary outpost of human settlement. Beside the vast view, rather than a concrete permanence but out of sight, was a huge, sprawling suburban landscape. For that moment, Emily sat silently and let her vision open out into the scrolling panorama. It astonished her to see the sudden open space after the boxed-in streets of the capital. The light was dancing through rolling cumulus clouds that were like a mixture of pristine Renaissance sculptures, with their curves and curls blowing through in slow motion animation, while other grey and purple and blue blobs threatened rain at some possible point. She watched the gliding arc of the seagulls racing on invisible thermal racetracks, circling in small groups as though waiting for some magical moment to depart or arrive at a point of feeding or rest. The relative silence of the train carriage became a confusing backdrop to her open mind, its wheels steadily grinding the noise of movement on tracks. Her fellow human passengers were all silent except for the sounds some of their phones broadcast. Children and teenagers watching videos, adults lost in the endless scroll, and others silently listening to the endless stream of news and information. She felt a sudden urge to jump up and shake people to look out the window, to say, "Look how beautiful the world is, look. This view, this light, these colours in the sky, the shapes of the clouds, the reflecting movement of the sea, the birds stalking through the marsh, that black Labrador splashing through the ripples of the low tide. It only exists now. It will be gone in 5 minutes or 5 seconds. It will be different again, and you're here to see it, to recognize it. You're the one who completes the connection for God. You make it visible by looking and being moved. Isn't that why we're here? To just witness the beauty of this moment that is over as soon as you look? How is the temporary eternal? What is this mystery?" The light rolled on with gleams of golden rays burning the sky before being shaded into grey and white again. The fresh air at the seaside town awakened the senses to the dynamic movements of nature again, after the recycled air of the sealed tubes that had carried her so far that day. Emily took deep breaths as she wandered out of the suburban train station and ambled along the coastal road with her eyes still fixed on the movement of a deep purple sea that rolled with spitting speckles of drifting drizzle, rain and snow that mixed and mingled with gusts of salt and brine water that drifted in with the sense of the elements, instructing her she was alive in this place, and there was now no rushing desire to be inside again. "Mary is the sea, and Jesus is the fish." A male voice appeared from behind, and Emily turned to see a young man grinning at her, while he stood holding a piece of rope attached to a small goat who was trying to eat his way free. "And who is the land?" Emily said as she eyed up the strange character, a young man with tousled red and blonde hair, and a frayed denim jacket that seemed long out of date with anything in this contemporary culture. "The land? Do you not know?" he asked her with a widening grin. "Eru is her name." "Ah, not just a pretty face. I thought there was a reason why you were the only one not looking at your phone." He brought the goat over to the sea wall to take a proper look at the panoramic view beside Emily. "Were you watching me on the train?" she asked him with some suspicion, though felt there was something unreal about the conversation, and touched the cold, wet stone wall to feel the firmness of some objective reality. "I couldn't help but notice," he smiled. "And you got the goat on the train?" She dared to stroke the head of the animal, who seemed indifferent to both of them. "Well, if you didn't see him then, you'll never know for sure. He could have been on his best behaviour and sitting quietly with me. Or maybe that's madness and I've just picked him up as soon as I got off the train. And now we've got to get him home. And what are you going to do with him? Does he have a name?" Emily politely inquired. "You don't know his name?" he laughed. "This is Billy the Kid, and we're trying to get him home for the evening. You see the little island off the coast there? That's his home, Darky Island. You should be honoured to meet King Billy. 'Tis a special occasion for him to be running around on the mainland. but he's got to be wrapped up in bed soon lest he turn into a pumpkin. King Billy? Emily repeated the title with disbelief. I know what you're thinking, not the orange fella, no. He's king of Dalkey Island, he is. Crowned last summer. King Billy the Kid. And we're waiting for a boat to take us home. You could say there are places where Eru is just sleeping and not totally dead. Sure, it's probably why we can not even talk at all, you know. And that's your job. Emily asked her question with a raised eyebrow to suggest she wasn't going to believe whatever was being offered at face value. Job? Ah, no, I'm a well-known character. Sure, I'm really best known for being the DJ for the Kingstown dub sound system. Kingstown? Ah, yeah, King Billy the Kid's town. Home of Jamaican Dublin dub and the finest herbal supplements man. Irie, August Ja Rastafari. He opened his jacket to reveal a t-shirt with the Line logo. Do you not know your history at all? This was Kingstown back in the old days when Billy the Kid was running riot all over the shop. And well, when I'm not trying to bring him home, I make the finest Celtic Irish Jamaican dub with the boys. You know, they're all blissed on the ganja, like the white fellas with the dreadlocks, you know. They don't know if they're coming or going at all, like they wouldn't even know if they're Irish or Jamaican or what they are. Sure, nobody knows anything these days. But we bash out some tunes just so the people know they're living in Babylon. Dub Babylon. That's the name of the album. We like to remind them we're creatures of the earth. You see, we were mighty honoured to be blessed by the one and only Lee Scratch Perry, the original reggae, recalcitrant miscreant, the original purple-blooded priest of Egypt. Did you know he lived in Switzerland? Home of all those reincarnated high priests and lizards. But yeah, it is good to confuse the hive mind. They love a bit of multicultural culture, and then the trick is to get them singing along to the lyrics. Sodom and Gomorrah. Burned by fire, you know. Ah yeah, you can't beat a bit of dub reggae for learning about the Old Testament. You are a bit of a character. Emily smiled and began to walk on. Ah no, 'tis your grandfather is the real character, he said, and waited with a grin for her to stop and make eye contact again. How did you... She began with no certainty how the sentence should end. Ah, I must be psychic, or maybe you're psychic, or maybe it's the weather. But it's your granddad who'll be fondly remembered as the great character in this town. I'm sure he's waiting for you. You'll be great help to him. Better than a monastery or a nunnery, is it? You think I want to be a nun? She asked and walked closer to pet the goat's head again as it sniffed her hand with curiosity. Ah, I'm only joking. We're walking around in circles, on the psychic geography of the dead and buried, and trying to figure out who's still alive or not sleeping anyway. See, the sea is a natural attractor. You see so many people coming out for a wander and then they don't know what to do except eat ice cream. They pause for a moment to take a photo of themselves. I guess that proves they left the house. A nice bit of evidence for them before they reattach to the mainframe. Do you think they're all pod people? Emily asked the man. That's it, exactly right. The pod people from outer space. I wouldn't be surprised if they're all being cloned and all the real people are being taken to Zeta Reticuli. Or maybe there aren't any real people left at all. Well, you never meet them, except for yourself, of course. That's why I thought I'd say hello. That's my boat now. He pointed to a small white motorboat pulling into a jetty and a man in a peaked cap giving him a wave. You never told me your name, Emily asked after him again as he began clambering down the stone embankment with the goat in tow. Billy! Billy the Kid! The same as your man here. He flashed a smile as the light danced on the water and his face disappeared behind the glare of the golden sun. When Emily looked again, he was on his way towards the island with the rippling wake trailing behind the little motorboat, like a painting come to life in the vivid light pushing between ever-changing clouds. She watched as he held up the goat to give a wave with his hoof, and she found herself involuntarily waving back. Narrow pedestrian paths twisted through the odd and seemingly random layers of history that flowed along the coast, with ancient pubs beside prefab houses and modernist square blocks jutting out with wide and expensive sea views, beside ugly corporate blocks of apartments, beside tiny single-story cottages that were older than the construction of the harbour walls. The trails echoed the paths of the ancient indigenous peoples, the wanderers and traders from the Roman Empire, and the later Druids and Vikings who all left their psychic lairs still swimming invisibly in the air beneath the contemporary sight of dreary dog walkers and fashionable lycra-clad narcissistic fitness enthusiasts. Emily casually walked on, following the natural bends of the craggy coast, trusting that, as the letter said, it would be impossible to miss the home at the end of a jutting headland. It would be the home that looked like it could be swept into the sea at any time. And there it was. Two men were standing outside the long cottage that looked like a white brick boat about to be launched down the slope into the sea. It was covered beneath a foot of pure snow, and an elderly man wrapped in a black cloak was attempting to clear a path with a kitchen brush, while a portly middle-aged man in a grey puffy winter coat was animatedly arguing his point, with hands that were drawing every expression from his mouth into the cold air like a conductor raising an orchestra to its final crescendo. Along the wall that ran down to the door of the cottage, a tabby cat was sauntering past with an eye on everything happening, with suggestive glances that intimated it was deciding what might be the most fun to become involved in. The arguing couple, the banks of snow, the squealing seagulls, or Emily, who was walking in parallel to the cat. She offered her hand to sniff, and the cat inspected her, determining what exactly this girl was before running down to the elderly man, who gently tugged the cat's tail before it jumped off the wall and ran out of sight. Emily followed with her eyes and saw on the corner beside the door were blue enamel letters on the wall beside the letterbox that spelt out V.I.T.R.I.O.L Cottage. Emily was silently mouthing the words to herself when she caught the eye of the older man, who made a slight and subtle nod of his head to her as she approached. "I agree with you. I've eaten fish nearly every day I've lived here, and I don't believe a word we're told. Now, I have to make the tea," the older man said, kicking off the final bits of snow from around his front gate, and stopped to lean on his brush so as to listen to his associate's final comments. "In the 1920s, our food was full of iodine and selenium. They made sure of it. They were breeding a healthy generation for the next World War. They knew they were going to rewrite all those boundaries on the map and create their liberal world order. It cost them at least 60 million dead from 1914 to 1945. But they were surplus to requirements anyway. It was always a killing field for young European men to be ground up in. A generation of the finest breeding stock wiped out. As soon as the war ended, iodine started disappearing from food. And what did we get instead? Bromine and food and clothes and furniture, as everything has to be fire retarded, even the bread. And then fluoride in water that just so happened to fill up all those natural receptors in our body that were designed for iodine. And every decade it's got worse, with our crops covered in glyphosates. Whatever you do, don't drink beer. We stick to spirits these days. But they're all endocrine disruptors, even the alcohol. And everything is designed to maximise estrogen and reduce testosterone. What kind of society does that produce? We'll have a look around at the smart people in their smart cities living the lives of smart metropolitan metrosexuals, who can only dream of having enough credits to select the sex and IQ of their baby in a test tube. Who can afford more than a Delta these days? Jesus! What kind of failed civilization is this, where the entire environment is becoming toxic to the organic human being? Like the earth is being terraformed from being carbon-based to being silicon-based. So you have to ask who or what is at the top of the pyramid giving orders, because it benefits no organic living thing down here. And if it is all about greedy psychopaths, then they doom themselves unless they're not human, and don't need to breathe air and eat meat," the old man exclaimed, and clapped his hands while watching his breath blow out into a visible cloud in the cold. "Sounds like quite the idea for one of those science fiction films you're always watching. You should write it all down. The last time I watched something like that, it was Soylent Green, and I always remember they said it in 2020. And how futuristic that sounds. Space year 2020. Well, I will look forward to discovering who indeed sits at the top of the pyramid, and I will be sure that we eat our sardines. But I must leave you now, as I see someone else is looking for my attention." Emily's grandfather bent down to pick up the tabby cat who had twisted between his legs, and looked up to see the girl who had followed the path to his home, as the portly man carefully wobbled back onto the path, determined not to slip. "I'm Emily. She began an awkward introduction. "Oh, child, it's lovely to see you. Come in out of the cold." He gripped her arm and smiled as he held the front door of the cottage open while holding the cat in the other. Emily realised she had arrived without causing a surprise or shock to anyone and crossed the threshold of the old building. The bracing wildness of the seafront suddenly changed into a dark, musty, cold place. Emily's grandfather immediately began rolling up some newspapers and sticking them into the fireplace, along with some twigs and wood to bring some heat and light into the evening's dark arrival. Emily stood idly by and looked at her new surroundings without touching anything, as everything looked like it might break or fall from its precarious position amid stacks of books and odd-looking instruments that appeared on every surface before spilling onto the ground. Books of all shapes and sizes everywhere, as if a library had suddenly decided to rearrange their entire catalogue according to chaos theory. Gradually more lights were plugged in and flicked on, bringing dim pools of illumination to the different corners of the long wood-panelled room. The overhead light stayed turned off, with Emily wondering if it was to save the sight of dust everywhere. She followed the lights being flicked as they came into the small kitchen that had a window looking out on the churning sea. They say a man who would voluntarily live by the sea and look out on infinity every day is a special kind of man. A madman, they would say. To look out on that. He pulled the curtains shut and began fiddling with the gas oven. "You'll have your own view from the bedroom upstairs." "I'm sure it's a lovely view," she replied. "Oh, it is, but you'll end up wishing you were somewhere else, or at least on a boat going somewhere." "Why is that?" "Because you're looking straight ahead at something always moving through every season beneath the sun, moon and stars, and nothing is changing but yourself. Well, it drives some people mad. Well, they're already a bit mad, but they move to the seaside and then they always end up being fondly remembered." "Are you the local character then?" she asked with gentle humour. "Well, it doesn't take much to be remembered these days. I'm practically outliving all the pod people now." "That's what he said." She laughed at the thought of somebody attempting to play a weird joke on her. "What's that?" He stopped to query her with a long look from his narrow eyes that fell down a narrow nose and chin, making him look deeply serious, if not troubled, but he was just concentrating to see if a trick was being played on himself. "There was this curious guy with the goat when I got off the train. He seemed to know you, or thought you were a character. Well, I don't know, but people must think it's funny to see V.I.T.R.I.O.L Cottage at the end of the road." She dared to let some of her inner thoughts out to see the response from her grandfather, who released a wry smile and nodded. "I don't suppose they teach you Latin these days, no?" "Visita interia terra rectificando invenies occultum lapidem." "Visit the interior of the earth, and purifying you will find the hidden stone." Emily closed her eyes and responded in English without thinking. She could see the face of the goat chewing on its string again. "Ah, so you're playing a little game yourself? I see, I see." He muttered to himself and continued clearing some space for his guest. "No, I'm trying to figure out." Emily brushed away the pause and thought it best to figure things out after the introductions. "All your books piled up in little towers. It's like Sunduku." "Ah, Gesundheit," he laughed. "It's a Japanese thing to have a pile of unread books in your home." "Ah, did you study Japanese in one of those colleges?" "No, well, a little bit. Sometimes I thought Japan is a place I'd like to go and see for myself. What it's really like, it's one of those places we always see in movies and cartoons, and it seems so exotic, I guess, because they have their own culture." "Well now, these books." He interrupted her to explain the odd sight of little rising temples made out of books arranged like Lego. "These have all been read and reread as I'm finishing up my work. And you could help me with them if that's why you came. Because you thought I was at that stage of life where someone better look in on me to check I'm not so much of a character that I need to be taken to the nursing home and to be put to sleep. Now, this Sunduku thing is interesting. It suggests something random to my ears, and the sight of this place, my little humble abode, must suggest something very random to your eyes." Now, if you're curious, you can find meaning in anything. And I think you have the knack. You can have a look. Take anything you like and see what's waiting now. A little game of bibliomancy, if you like. What's that? She asked, while eyeing the nearest pile of books and squinted to see if she could read their sideways titles, while feeling a little magnetic tug pulling her towards them. You could say it's like casting lots, or seeking a synchronous meaning. It's a lot easier than cutting open a chicken, unless you'd like a chicken for dinner, he said with a smile, and turned his attention back to the oven in the kitchen and allowed Emily to follow her curious instincts to a particular book without his attention disrupting the matter. Are you going to teach me magic tricks? Emily asked as she gingerly removed a book from the pile without causing the tower to fall. I'll tell you what's magic, and that's what you give your attention to. See what draws you towards it and what is drawn towards yourself. She let the old book fall open in her hands without looking at the title or author and began reading aloud. Alpha heavily break the waters, Beta extending over the plains, Gamma they cover the lands, Delta in low places, where Epsilon there are obstructions, shores form and whirlpools. Zeta strike the earth, Eta with water, Theta the waters spread, Iota on all that lives and moves, Kappa obstructions give way, and Lambda submerged is the land of Mu Mu. Ni peaks only, Z appears above the waters. Omicron whirlwinds blow around, Pi and little by little, Rho until there comes Sigma cold air, before Tau, where valleys existed, are Upsilon now abysses, cold depths. In circular places, Phi mud formed, Chi a mouth, Psi opens, vapours, Omega come forth, and volcanic sediments. Oh, you are a magical child. Of all the things to pick. You did come to help then. He marvelled at the sight of this girl standing in his home leafing through the old book. The Lost Continent of Mu by James Churchward. She said the title aloud to confirm it for an invisible audience that she imagined were writing it into posterity. What's it all about? What does it mean? Well, he believed after researching the ancient Kara-Maya language that the Greek alphabet revealed itself to have been encoded with a record of how the Lemurian continent sank. Now, some people believe that Lemuria, or Mu, was a great continent that existed in the Pacific that held a sophisticated civilization, like Atlantis. Emily asked in confusion, as she'd never heard the word Lemuria before, though it sounded familiar. She started wondering what a lemur looked like. Had she seen one of those on a BBC documentary? Yes, it was like Atlantis, but it was older and in the Pacific. Lemuria sank somewhere in the Pacific long ago. Atlantis sank somewhere in the Atlantic between High Brazil and Greenland. They were our distant ancestors from a long, long time ago. Lemuria was like the original motherland of the human race, and Atlantis was the fatherland. And they both became corrupt and faded away after a great catastrophe, probably at the hands of their own mad scientists. And except for those survivors that swam away and brought the fire in their mind to the indigenous hunter-gatherer tribes they found everywhere, the whole world was reset. Well, that's the story I would have told you if I had been there to read you a bedtime story growing up. I think I would have liked that. Emily placed the book back on the top of the pile and peeked out the kitchen window, with its curtains leaving a gap big enough to still see the rolling waves of the ocean as the sun rapidly fell. People must have thought the gods emerged from the ocean. I wonder, is that who the two Nadana are? What is your dharma, Emily? Her grandfather asked. What is your special mission in life? The only thing you can do. You very kindly came to see how I am. Well, how am I? I'm finishing my life's work. I've long completed my last cycle around the sun, and the time I have left is best spent organising things and processing what has happened in my life. You know that we move through spirals and cycles of 7 years, Think of growing up and being 7 years old, then 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 49, 56, 63, 70, 77, and 84. Well, 84 is the end of the journey, a complete cycle around the sun, and I'm older than that now. It's enough time to do what we came to do, and think of those poor fools who pass away around those key ages. Of all those who never make it to 28 as they fail to mature and open new inner gates to greater worlds. Our great work is moving the body through the alchemy of our emotions, dreams, desires, wishes, and finding the gold of wisdom at the end, to know we came to know ourselves, to remember. I certainly did. I'm figuring things out for myself. I guess that's why I came, Emily offered as an explanation for her arrival, while being aware she wasn't revealing anything. Are you an alchemist, though? I mean, the family doesn't understand, and I guess everybody seems eccentric to the pod people. Is that your life's work? Alchemy is more of an art, and an art is a metaphor and metamorphosis, and the real work is the work done inside. I've lived beyond my final cycle, and what more is there to hang on to than pottering about the garden and feeding the cat? And I think now it was always going to be a story about the grandchildren of the alchemists and the world they found themselves in. It's for you and your generation to eat the transubstantiation of the phoenix in this life. My work is done, and I'm left to prepare myself for the return of Umamua's twin and its final message for those who are listening. But child, let me make us some hot food. I think you're the type who can nudge a man out of his mind without even realising it. Was that an asteroid that passed by? Is it astronomy that's been your life's work, and it's going to pass by soon, like Halley's Comet? Will I get to see it? I wouldn't say I'm an astronomer, but an observer of nature and the clock in the sky, and there's many invisible things that come to us who put up an antenna to listen. And there are devious creatures on this planet making their own broadcasts to outer space. There are strange things between the shortwave and longwave, and well, all I can say is if you listen, you might see something. Do you believe in reincarnation? Emily asked, looking at the old man who was quietly lighting candles while dimming all the electric lights. Some places seem more familiar to me than others. I know I'm unusual because I've spent most of my life on the homestead, and though I could read about anything and see video of anything, I became so used to that little piece of the earth, not just the scenery and knowing where the river ran between the oak trees and where every burrow could hide a secret stash. I mean, I became used to the feeling of the place, the scent of the damp moss, the feeling of a living place, like you were living on the earth. It's so different travelling over all the concrete. It's suffocating. And all these strangers with their strange faces. But being here is so different now. It's so alive in a different way. In the salt in the air and all the seabirds riding the airwaves. Sometimes the homestead would get bad pollen in the summer and you'd get used to it, but the air here is so alive. It feels like living on the edge of a habitat with the birds, and you could be swept away or learn to fly, perhaps. Her grandfather felt his own senses sharpen in the moment as the girl attempted to describe what he knew were ever-changing sensations. But he also knew there was an edge to a beginner's mind that could take him to places that couldn't be methodically trudged to, or places with special views that there was no time left to crawl to, as they were atop a mountain. He took a steaming shepherd's pie out of the oven while Emily set the table in the kitchen, before they finally sat down to eat their dinner. The outside world rapidly vanished in the darkness of the short winter's day, as Emily adjusted to the sickly yellow glow of the kitchen's single incandescent light bulb hanging from the ceiling. She looked again at her new surroundings that appeared ever more stark under the unforgiving light. The linoleum floor made her think that perhaps nothing had changed in this old place since perhaps the 1950s, or was it much older? A yellow tin of Coleman's mustard sat by the kitchen cabinet, and Emily wondered how long had these consumer products been a backdrop to our lives. Was that something had changed since the 1920s? Could she have sat here having dinner with so little changed? Well, at least since they plugged every home into the electric grid. And what year was that? She wondered to herself as the sense impressions flowed through her, and she attempted to hold on to the feeling of the wholesome, warm food being eaten, lest her mind fly right out of her body into the black night. I'm glad you're okay, Emily said as the plates were cleared away, and she wasn't sure what she should volunteer to do, as the old man was obviously so used to taking care of himself. I am fine, sweet child. I know the family worries as families do, and it's strange times that we're living in, and we all know they're going to get stranger, at least for those of us still human. And it's a confusing thing to look out on a very sick society and try to figure out where do you figure in all of that. And well, it's why you came. There's some space here for the moment, and I meant to say to you, child, please call me Callan. I know you don't have many memories of me growing up, and I didn't know many of the young clan, but that is what the closest to me have always known me as, he said with a smile that suddenly made him look 20 years younger as he touched Emily's hand on the table. She felt a flash of warm, grit-like powder on his soft skin trickle in images that appeared if she closed her eyes, so she opened them to concentrate on what she wanted to say. Callan, I think I've realised you have to choose, Emily said, suddenly remembering an easy day during the last summer. I think you have to make a conscious decision and not pretend that you don't, or realise someone else making the decision for you is a choice too. You see, when we had good weather, I always loved to go for a walk on my own by the lake. It's so peaceful there. The only sounds you hear are from some of those small farmers walking the land with the tractor. And I love to walk along the lake shore, and sometimes the water would be like glass, like a mirror that you could throw a stone into and watch an endless ripple. Or just watching a duck or a swan paddling through this image in your mind. And the world felt so easy, so open, and everything coming into bloom. So green, and all the different colours of the flowers like highlights in an oil painting. Everything alive, and there wasn't anything in particular I had to do that day, and I was just enjoying it. And the only people you'd see would be some rowers going out. Sometimes they'd have a big race and leave all their rubbish behind and plastic bottles everywhere. And I always wondered why they had to travel out here to escape from the city, and when they go home again they leave the natural world in a worse condition. Like they're just stupid, completely disconnected. I guess they're fast asleep. Well, I'd ignore the rowers, and sometimes you'd see a few people fishing, and they'd leave all their horrible beer cans and plastic shopping bags everywhere too. Well, it's still beautiful, and it was on the edge of the world, the wider world of shops and supermarkets in the village. And then I saw this couple sitting by the lake in the car park, and they were flying a drone over the water. But when I got closer, I could see the man was wearing VR goggles over his eyes, like a full headset. It is a shock to know for certain we live in the time when they make themselves visible to us now. All theories become realities, and we best choose the best one for ourselves. Her grandfather observed, and Emily paused to consider what was being revealed now. Yes, Emily continued, there is no roadmap for the future. We only know what it means to be human and organic and sovereign, and I think divine in some way. And if we wish to remain that way, well, being in such a beautiful natural place, walking along the lake shore and seeing this techno weirdness with my own eyes, that someone had made the consumer choice to interact with the natural world through this ridiculous machine, when they could just open their eyes and go for a walk and run and swim and jump around. But they were just sitting there flying their wretched little machine with its horrible noisy engine. I think I realised that even if you lived your life as a hermit, eventually the world comes to knock on your door. That you still have to choose, maybe every day and in every moment, to be human, to be part of this unfolding expression of life. Another brush stroke in the painting. And there are these things who are so lost in playing with baubles of convenience. I feel like they've walked away from the human family and have placed the care of their soul in the hands of demons. I feel like there's so much that can't be put into words. I feel all these colours and all the horrors of this world are little spikes sticking into our soul. And if we could just go back to the ocean and wash it all away. We shall return to the ocean in time, but not in a time of our choosing. And in the meantime, we're glad to have the company. There are no demons in this house, and it's like seeing an angel in the flesh to have you here at just the perfect moment. Come now, let me show you your bedroom. He got up and put the cutlery in the sink and opened a door that Emily thought was a cupboard, but was actually revealed to be a spiral staircase going up to another floor above them. The staircase opened out on a narrow corridor where there was a tiny bathroom and narrow bedroom squeezed between old walls that seemed slightly lumpy and uneven, with red bricks breaking through ancient dissolving orange wallpaper. A single bed was aligned between a window facing the sea, an old brown writing desk, and an open fireplace that Callan bent down to light. Emily looked out on the sea that was only illuminated by a partial moon casting rippling silver slivers across the waves with sleet and rain still in the cold air. She was startled to realise that from this new vantage point she could look directly at the island she had watched the man with the goat depart for. The silhouette of the landmass in the middle of the sea was unmistakable. "Is that Ducky Island?" she asked. "Oh yes, it's a nice view when you can see it." "And those old buildings, are there people living there?" she said as she thought she could see a slight flicker of a yellow flame appear and disappear in the blackness. "Oh no. You can see in the daytime there's a Martello Tower and the ruins of an old church and maybe a barracks. The British built Martello Towers all along the coast, all in line of one another to watch out for an invasion from Napoleon, who unfortunately didn't come, as my French would be a lot better if he did. No, nobody lives there but a few goats. There's a nice painting of the place there. I think that painting was here when I moved in, and that was a long time ago. You can't walk anywhere without cracking a few historical eggs in this place. Good night to you, and we can sort out things for you properly in the morrow." She looked at the oil painting on the wall. A few brief, broad brush strokes made a green impression of the island in a violet sea, with a little white blob for a Martello Tower and a brown square for the remains of an old church. And then moving black, white, yellow and orange dots were rabbits and goats. She walked right up to the painting until her nose touched the layer of dust on the surface of the picture that made her sneeze. She blinked through a rolling static of white noise behind closed eyelids and opened and closed her eyes again and again as she looked at waves of snow covering the island. As the animals ran through the tiny storm, a small black and blonde smudge ran across the length of the island and began picking up all the goats and juggling them, throwing them end over end in the air like an endless loop. "Oh, Billy," she whispered to herself as she lay in the cold bed. "I don't think I've ever been so tired in my life to start imagining the weirdest things." She turned to examine a crystal radio set that was on the bedside table. A long wire ran from the table to the window and left a slim crack in the frame that allowed the wire to run outside in the elements for an elevated position of receptivity, while leaving the tiniest crack behind for the wind to whistle inside. She gradually turned the radio dial with her thumb and listened to the crackling reception. It was like trying to find human voices and music amidst the noise, like a game of hide and seek. All she could make out was a repeating phrase.
This is Radio Cosmik coming soon. This is Radio Cosmik coming soon.
She closed her eyes and felt herself slipping down into a cave where water was running through, and looked up to see a turquoise crystal cavern filled with dripping water above her. For a second she almost panicked but kept her mind empty and looked at the liquid slowly morphing into a breathing mirror that reflected her eyes. She stared into the blue eyes and was shocked to recognize herself. She suddenly remembered she was the creator of this dream and woke up. Tabby Cat was purring on my lap. I softly stroked his head to confirm the warm animal was real, and he felt very real as he looked up and yawned, revealing his white hunter's teeth before blinking at me to see if I was going to move and disturb him. I stroked his head again and he closed his eyes to return to sleep. I looked up to see Emily was quietly watching me. I realised she was that girl who was the waitress in the cafe, and she was just sitting there with a gentle smile. She seemed so familiar now. That was my first day here. I only realised later I'd been activated. I don't know if by accident or whether my grandfather was waiting for the perfect moment. Sometimes I thought that maybe it was just the colour or hue of the light being so perfect, like I'd been hit by a ray of light right in my brain, or that I just arrived at the perfect moment for my grandfather to imagine I was a heaven sent angel who had come to help him. And you triggered it again. And you had to see, to know, if you're to come with me. Those were your memories, I said, not knowing if I was asking a question or making a statement. This cat feels so real. Of course he's real, she laughed as I sat still, afraid to move an inch. Where are you going? I asked again as she jumped up to open the door of the tiny bedroom I found myself in. When you've woken up, we're going to find the holy well and help the goats escape from Dalkey Island,